The city councils, the police, the firemen who are working today, seize this opportunity and make our nation even stronger and greater.
Please take a second to subscribe, then like and share afterwards. We can really use your support. Thank you.
Our president, our Congress, the governors of the states, seize this opportunity and make our nation even stronger and greater.
For a time, the skies were quiet. Wall Street was at a standstill. Hollywood was silent. America was gathered in prayer, and churches were filled with people seeking to find solace. But it was only superficial. America was not turning back to God. There was no real change of heart, no repentance. The nation would soon return to normal, and the departure from God continued as it was. In fact, the departure only increased in speed. In the last episode, we covered the first line in Isaiah 9:10, but it is the second line that we will be focusing on in greater detail that captures the spirit of the vow. It may not appear to be very revealing, but we need to see beyond the words and see instead the context surrounding them, and the spirit behind the rebuilding. The falling of the stones was a warning, but instead they respond with defiance. This defiance will be the very thing that will bring upon their judgment. And it doesn't just say rebuild, but that it will be with hewn stone, clearly a material much stronger and more secure than the previous material, naturally to be more resistant to any future attack. The hewn stone signifies their intent to come out from the attack stronger than they were before, an effort of their own power. Instead of being humbled by the calamity, they became emboldened by it. So, the new construction would become a concrete manifestation and witness of the nation's defiance of God's call. Isaiah was quoting the leaders of Israel as they made the vow, and in the modern replaying of the mystery, the mayor of the city of New York, the state governor, the senator, and even the president of the United States all used the same three words of this vow:
that we will rebuild New York City.
The defiance of ancient Israel proved they were far from repentant. They gloried instead in their iniquity. The same, too, with the rebuilders of New York and the leaders of the country. A sign appeared at ground zero with these words: a new icon will soon rise above the lower Manhattan skyline, the Freedom Tower. This icon was an icon of defiance. Senator John Kerry would foretell the meaning of this new icon. This would be one of many prophetic manifestations of what was to come. Rebuilding Ground Zero was going to be America's statement of defiance, precisely what the ancient vow was expressing. Biblical commentaries on this line of Isaiah 9:10 state, "They boasted that they would rebuild their devastated country and make it stronger and more glorious than ever before." The words are strikingly similar to those of Rudy Giuliani, mayor of New York City, in response to 9/11. The Jewish people began to rebuild and make it stronger than before. Rather than the more ancient method of mud brick that was far inferior, they quarried stones, carved them into massive blocks, and brought them back to the site of destruction where the bricks had fallen. But the very first stone of building was always the most important, the cornerstone. It is like the baseline on which all others will be measured and built around. It begins the construction, not only a necessary stone, but also a symbolic one. In Hebrew, this stone is called the gazit. It can be translated as carved stone, or sometimes cut stone, or hewn stone. In Israel, this gazit stone would be filled with symbolic meaning, signifying the very beginning of the rebuilding and fulfillment of its vow. And it was so with the case of Israel, because we can now uncover that there was actually a tower built after the destruction. If we read Isaiah 9:10 in the Septuagint, we see a detail that we don't see in the Masoretic text. It is extremely telling in light of the modern retelling of the mystery. Since the rebuilding after 9/11, they had built the Freedom Tower. It reads, "The bricks are fallen down, but come, let us hew stones, and cut down sycamores and cedars, and let us build for ourselves a tower." In reality, this gazit stone isn't just a fulfillment of its vow. In reality, it is a symbol of the nation's rejection of God's calling. When the sign of the gazit stone manifests, it is like a harbinger that carries a warning of future calamity. But how did this manifest in New York City, you may ask? They use modern techniques today to build, far from ancient methods as they did with the gazit stone, right? Wrong. According to God's ordinance, the modern replaying had to manifest with a gazit stone, and so it did. Although it would be considered unorthodox today, the builders felt it to be appropriate to incorporate a cornerstone as a ceremonial inclusion in its foundation. And did the modern retelling follow the requirement to bring the stone down to the site of destruction at Ground Zero to be the very first piece to rebuild? Yes. When the stone was brought down, there was a gathering of leaders. The mayor of the city, Rudy Giuliani, the governor of the state, George Pataki, the governor of New Jersey, and other officials and guests. They were all focused on the gazit stone, a massive rectangular hewn block of quarried stone weighing 20 tons. They would also make it symbolic and gave it a name, the Freedom Stone. It was to be the cornerstone of not only the Freedom Tower, but also a cornerstone to the rebuilding and restoration from the 9/11 attacks in general. As the stone in Isaiah 9:10 was linked to the proclaiming of the vow, so too would there be proclamations made at this ceremony. The CEO of the quarry company stated, "It will forever remain a symbolic cornerstone for the rebuilding of New York and the nation." As it was in ancient Israel, the act of rebuilding with quarried stone was intended to send a message. So the governor of New York would proclaim, "By laying this magnificent cornerstone of hope, we are sending a message to the people around the world." A message of defiance. On one hand, a defiance of the calamity, but on the other, beneath the surface something much deeper. A much deeper defiance, just as it was with ancient Israel. One commentary explains it this way: far from being humbled and becoming repentant as a result of the chastening judgments of the Lord, they are resolutely determined to withstand God and rebuild on an even grander scale. The bricks have crumbled, but we will rebuild with stone cut out of the quarry. Stone cut out of the quarry, just as the rebuilding of Ground Zero and of America cutting the stone from a quarry from bedrock in upstate New York. Even Governor Pataki would allude to the stone cut out of the quarry as he spoke his proclamation over the stone. Today we take 20 tons of bedrock of our state and place it as a foundation, the bedrock of a new symbol of American strength and confidence. Like with ancient Israel, the quarried stone would become the embodiment of a nation's misplaced confidence in its own power to emerge stronger than before. And the act of laying down the quarried stone would be a manifestation of what the commentaries call the spirit of defiance. The bricks may have fallen down. It was of no consequence. They would build with hewn stone. Thus they breathed the very spirit of defiance. The nation determines to act in a spirit of defiance. It will turn its fallen bricks into massive stones. What is the significance of a spirit of defiance? On the day that America officially began its rebuilding to replacing the fallen bricks of 9/11 with the Gazette stone, the governor would make a proclamation from the floor of Ground Zero. Listen to the words. Today we, the heirs of that revolutionary spirit of defiance, lay this cornerstone. Here he mentions the quarried stone and rebuilding in defiance to the very warning God was using to wake up the nation. But it failed. As so, the rebuilding of Ground Zero would become tangled in a continuous stream of controversy, confusion, obstacles, dissension, and conflict. Clearly, this undertaking was not at all blessed by God. Even after the stone was set in place, the tower's construction would be challenged, halted, redrawn, renamed, and reversed. The plans to rebuild would be frustrated for years. Eventually, they would remove the stone from Ground Zero altogether. That's right, the very cornerstone that symbolized the nation's strength and determination as a vow to rebuild was removed, a symbol of God's condemnation and disapproval. The same too with ancient Israel. Their rebuilding would likewise be frustrated. The laying down of the Gazette stone was one more link in a chain of judgment. One Bible commentary goes on to reveal what it all leads to. It will turn its fallen bricks into massive stones that will not fail. It was to be followed with fearful penalty, to be pressed on every hand by its enemies, to be prepared for still impending miseries. The defiance of God shuts out immeasurable good. 9/11 was a replaying of the ancient mystery, and yet the leaders in America had no idea what they were doing. No idea they were reenacting the ancient prophecy, stepping right into the ancient footsteps. And what does it all portend for America's future? If those who came to Ground Zero that day to issue their proclamation had realized what it all portended, they would have just stayed home. Up next, we uncover the third part of the Isaiah 9:10 mystery as we finally unlock the meaning of the sycamore and what it meant for the city and the nation. Here on Prophecies Uncovered.